The ancient wooden beams of the Last Stand bar stretched across the ceiling like the ribs of a sleeping beast. Rain pattered against the foggy windows, creating a comforting rhythm that complemented the soft jazz playing in the background. This wasn't just any bar. It was a living piece of California history, standing since the gold rush, with walls that had absorbed a century and a half of whispered secrets, hearty laughter, and occasional tears. In a shadowed corner booth, Clint Eastwood sat alone, his weathered fingers wrapped around a glass of neat whiskey. At 92, his face was a roadmap of a life fully lived, each line and crease telling stories of countless film sets, political battles, and personal triumphs. He wasn't there for attention, quite the opposite. The dim lighting and corner position were deliberate choices, allowing him to observe without being observed, to exist in that rare space between presence and invisibility. Sarah, the owner of the Last Stand, glanced over at Clint with quiet respect. She had known him for years, not as the Hollywood legend or the former mayor, but simply as a regular who appreciated good whiskey and better silence. She kept his glass filled and the curious tourists at bay, an unspoken agreement between two people who understood the value of peaceful solitude. The peaceful atmosphere shattered like glass when the door burst open, bringing with it the rumble of motorcycle engines and the heavy scent of leather and rain. 6 men entered, their presence immediately dominating the small space. Patches on their leather vests identified them as the Asphalt Kings, a motorcycle club known throughout Northern California for their rowdiness rather than their refinement. "Damn, that's some serious rain," boomed the leader, a mountain of a man with a salt and pepper beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. He slapped his wet vest, sending droplets flying across the polished bar top. "Hey, sweetheart, 6 beers and whatever whiskey doesn't taste like piss." Sarah's smile remained professional but tight as she began pouring their drinks. The other patrons, a middle-aged couple, 2 off-duty nurses, and a writer working on his laptop, shifted uncomfortably, the easy atmosphere of the bar evaporating with each loud laugh and crude joke from the bikers. Jake, the youngest of the group, was the first to notice Clint. He elbowed his friend and whispered something, causing both men to snicker. The leader, who went by Bear, followed their gaze to the corner booth, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," Bear announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like we're drinking with royalty tonight, boys. Hollywood himself, sitting right there." Clint didn't react, his eyes steady on the amber liquid in his glass, his expression unreadable. Bear, interpreting the silence as an invitation, grabbed his beer and sauntered over to Clint's table, his crew following like a leather-clad entourage. They surrounded the booth, creating a wall of bodies between Clint and the rest of the bar. "Mind if we join you?" Bear asked, already sliding into the booth opposite Clint without waiting for an answer. "Not every day we get to share drinks with a legend. Even if the legend's seen better days." A tense silence fell over the bar. Sarah paused mid-pour, her hand hovering over a glass. The writer closed his laptop. The off-duty nurses exchanged nervous glances. Everyone could feel it, the delicate moment balancing on a knife's edge, ready to tip toward either casual conversation or something far more unpleasant. Clint looked up slowly, his gaze traveling from one biker to the next before settling on Bear. When he finally spoke, his voice was that familiar rasp, quiet but somehow filling the entire room. "Free country," he said simply, lifting his glass slightly in acknowledgement. Bear grinned, revealing a gold tooth among otherwise surprisingly white teeth. "Hear that, boys? The man who played Dirty Harry says we can sit with him. I'm feeling kind of special right now." "You should," replied Clint with the faintest hint of a smile. "Not every day I get to drink with the Asphalt Kings." The bikers looked surprised, then pleased. Bear raised his beer in a toast. Too unexpected company. What might have turned into a pleasant, if unlikely, drinking session took a different turn when Jake, clearly the most intoxicated of the group, couldn't resist pushing boundaries. "Hey, quick question, Mr. Eastwood," he slurred, leaning forward. "In those old westerns, was it hard to get on the horse with those tight pants and, you know, at your age, even back then?" He snickered at his own joke. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Bear shot Jake a warning look, but the damage was done. "Jake, show some damn respect." Bear muttered, but the younger biker was too far gone to read the room. No, I'm serious, Jake continued, emboldened by alcohol and an audience. I mean, you're what, 90 now? You were already old when I was a kid. How many stunt doubles did they need when you were just trying to sit in a chair? He laughed loudly, looking around at his friends for approval. Inside Clint's mind, something shifted. He had spent decades in the public eye, had weathered criticism from film critics and political opponents alike, had been mocked and praised, and everything in between. Usually he let such comments roll off him like water off a duck's back. But tonight was different. Tonight he had come here seeking a moment of peace, a brief respite from being Clint Eastwood, and instead he found himself surrounded by men who saw him not as a person, but as a caricature, a convenient target for their juvenile humor. Yet his face betrayed none of these thoughts. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. You've got questions about age, Clint stated rather than asked, his voice deceptively calm. Understandable. Youth is curious about what's ahead. The bikers exchanged glances, uncertain of where this was going, but sensing a shift in dynamics. Truth is, Clint continued, setting his glass down with precision, growing old isn't for the faint of heart. Takes more courage to age than it does to ride a motorcycle or get a tattoo. Jake scoffed. Yeah, real brave to forget where you put your dentures. One of the other bikers, a quieter, more watchful man with a full sleeve of military tattoos, put a restraining hand on Jake's shoulder. That's enough, he said quietly, but Clint gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. No, let him speak. The young man's got something to say. Let's hear it. Jake, missing the dangerous undercurrent in Clint's tone, plunged ahead. I'm just saying it must be weird knowing your best days are way behind you. Like, what do you even do now? Sit around remembering when you were actually relevant? The bar had gone completely silent. Even the music seemed to have stopped, though no one had touched the sound system. Sarah stood frozen behind the bar, a clean glass in one hand, a towel in the other. Clint's weathered face gave away nothing as he carefully folded his hands on the table. Anyone who knew him well would have recognized this as a warning sign. This deliberate stillness, this focused attention. You know what's interesting about age? He finally said, each word measured and precise. You stop caring what others think, particularly those who haven't earned the right to an opinion. He leaned forward slightly, and despite no change in volume, his voice suddenly seemed to fill every corner of the room. When I was your age, I was unloading trucks during the day and taking acting classes at night, sleeping in a room no bigger than that bathroom over there, eating beans straight from the can because I couldn't afford a pot. I wasn't born into fame or success. I worked for it, failed at it, got knocked down and got back up. Again and again. He looked around at each biker, making eye contact one by one. I've buried friends and loved ones. I've seen the world change, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. I've made movies I'm proud of, and some I'd rather forget. I've made mistakes that cost me dearly and had successes I never dreamed possible. I've lived through 11 presidents, 2 pandemics, and more Hollywood trends than I care to count. His eyes settled back on Jake, who was now shifting uncomfortably in his seat. So when a young man who hasn't even figured out how to respect his elders thinks he can sit in judgment of a life he hasn't lived or even tried to understand, well, that doesn't make me angry. It makes me wonder what made him so afraid. Jake's face flushed red. Afraid? What the hell are you talking about, old man? I'm not afraid of anything. Clint's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Aren't you? Why else would you need to tear down someone who's walked a road you haven't even started on? People who are secure don't need to make others feel small. Bear cleared his throat awkwardly. Look, Mr. Eastwood, the kid's had a few too many. He doesn't mean... Oh, I think he does, Clint interrupted, his voice still eerily calm. And that's the problem. He means it because he doesn't know any better. Because somewhere along the way, someone told him that respect is optional, that wisdom comes with a hashtag, and that belittling others makes him bigger. He turned his attention fully to Jake now, and even in the dim light of the bar, the intensity of his gaze was palpable. But here's what age teaches you, son. Everything you mock me for, these wrinkles, these weathered hands, this irrelevant life, they're coming for you too. Every single day brings you closer to where I'm sitting. The only question is what you'll have to show for it when you get here. The silence that followed was absolute. Jake stared at his beer, unable to meet Clint's eyes. The other bikers looked equally uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in their drinks, or the floor, or anywhere but the weathered face of the man across from them. It was Bear who finally broke the silence. "He's right, Jake. You crossed a line." He turned to Clint, genuine respect in his eyes now. "I apologize for his behavior, sir, and for letting it continue." Clint acknowledged the apology with a slight nod, but kept his eyes on Jake. "The hardest thing about growing older isn't the body breaking down or the world moving on without you," he said, his voice gentler now. "It's watching young men with so much potential wasted on proving how tough they are instead of how good they could be." Something in these words seemed to finally break through. Jake looked up, his face a complex mix of embarrassment, defensiveness, and, surprisingly, a glimmer of something like recognition. I wasn't," he stammered, then fell silent again. Clint finished his whiskey in one smooth motion and set the glass down. "We've all said things we regret," he said. "The measure of a man isn't in never making mistakes. It's in how he handles them afterward." For a moment, no one moved. Then Jake slowly extended his hand across the table. "I'm sorry, Mr. Eastwood. I was being a jackass." Clint looked at the offered hand for a long moment before taking it in a firm handshake. "Call me Clint," he said simply. What happened next surprised everyone, perhaps even Clint himself. Instead of the conversation ending awkwardly or the bikers slinking away in embarrassment, they stayed. But the dynamic had completely transformed. The aggressive posturing was gone, replaced by something approaching genuine curiosity and respect. Bear, it turned out, had been a huge fan of Clint's films since childhood. The quiet man with military tattoos had served in Iraq and found comfort in watching Heartbreak Ridge during difficult deployments. Even Jake, once his initial embarrassment subsided, admitted that his grandfather had taken him to see Gran Torino when he was a teenager, and it was the first movie that ever made him cry. As the night progressed, Sarah kept the drinks flowing and the jazz playing low. The other patrons, sensing that the tension had passed, returned to their own conversations, though many couldn't help sneaking glances at the unlikely gathering in the corner booth. The hours passed in stories, Clint sharing experiences from his decades in Hollywood, the bikers opening up about their own lives and journeys. There was laughter, moments of surprising vulnerability, and even a few heartfelt revelations. By the time the bar's closing time approached, something remarkable had happened. 6 bikers and a Hollywood legend had found common ground, bridging gaps of age, experience, and perspective. As they prepared to leave, Bear reached out to shake Clint's hand one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not just walking out, for giving Jake, a chance to do better." Clint nodded, that familiar half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Life's too short for grudges, even at my age." The group laughed, but it was warm now, inclusive rather than mocking. They filed out into the night, the rain having stopped, leaving the world washed clean and the air fresh with possibility. Sarah approached after they'd gone, collecting glasses from the table. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I was about ready to call the sheriff when they started in on you." Clint chuckled. "Wouldn't be the first bar fight I've seen, but some battles are better won with words than fists." "Still," Sarah said, "the way you handled that, it was something to see. You didn't just shut them up, you got through to them. Changed something in that young one especially." Clint stood, leaving a generous tip on the table. "Maybe, or maybe he just needed someone to see him, really see him, instead of just reacting to him." As he put on his jacket and prepared to leave, Sarah added, "You know they're going to tell everyone about tonight. By tomorrow, there'll be stories all over town about how Clint Eastwood schooled a bunch of bikers." Clint paused at the door, looking back at the now empty bar with its history-soaked walls and warm golden light. "Let them talk," he said. "Maybe someone will hear something worth remembering." And with that, he stepped out into the night, the door swinging shut behind him with a gentle finality. Inside the last stand, Sarah turned off the jazz, dimmed the lights, and smiled to herself, knowing she had witnessed something that would become part of the bar's long and storied history. A quiet moment of transformation where wisdom had prevailed over pride and respect had been earned rather than demanded. Outside, the street was quiet, the only sound the distant rumble of motorcycles heading home and the soft footsteps of a Hollywood legend making his own way back. Perhaps a little lighter for having shared not just his irritation, but his hard-won wisdom with those who'd initially come only to mock.